Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the VSI Virtual Pub. Tonight is a pint I'm looking forward to. Shared many a conversation over the years with Professor Chris Brady. And if one thing you're looking forward to is a straightforward answer, you're going to get it this evening. So no further ado, we're going to get involved in a conversation with landlord Michael Caulfield and Professor Chris Brady. But I'm going to hand you over to Tim, who will just explain to you guys on the platform how you can engage and ask Chris a question or two. Tim?
Thanks, Tony. Guys, there's a chat box at the bottom. If you type in any questions that you want to come up there that are relevant, we'll ask them as we go along. If not, we'll pick two or three at the end that are pretty good ones to put him on the spot. We know he likes that. And we'll go from there. So use the chat room at the bottom. Any questions, pick up on it and let us know. And without further ado, I can pass this over to the amazing Mr. Caulfield, who's sat in the Shankly Arms.
Good evening, Chris. Good evening. Welcome to the Shankly Arms.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael.
I met you last week. I know all about you. I've even bought one of your books this week, so you owe me one.
I certainly do.
The Shankly Arms himself. So what would Shankly have made of this now? Not just football. What would Shankly have made of this situation? Because he was my inspirational leader growing up, hence my dog named after him. What would he be doing now? How would he be talking to us?
I'm going to try and answer this as honest as I can, notwithstanding the fact that all my parents and family are Evertonians. Okay, so yeah. trying to be a nice guy to start off with. I think he would have made the best of it. That's what he would have done. That's as simple as that. He would have just made the best of it. I said, "How do we?" I tell you what he would have done. He would have said, "How do we win when we come out of this? And how do we win this bit we're in now?" That's what he would have been looking at. And obviously they use that group around him, the boot room group around him. I think people don't remember, well, probably great Liverpool fans do, but they often don't remember that when Shankly arrived at Anfield, he didn't bring a whole load of guys with him like they do nowadays. He walked in and just met all the guys there, you know, Paisley and Fagan and Ronnie Moran, and that were already there. So the boot room already sort of existed. And he came in and sort of looked around and went, "Actually, this is a good idea. Let's get on with it." And he got on with it. And you know, which is possibly a lesson that people are looking at today. You know, you're bringing a whole management team in nowadays when you hire a new manager. But you're not only bringing a new management team in, you're sacking 10 people as well. So you've got all that cost going in as well. And it's always a bit odd when, you know, if you're from business background, like some of us are, you go in there and say, "Well, can you imagine bringing a CEO in and saying, 'Oh, don't worry, bring 10 of your mates with you. Oh, and by the way, and your brother and his agent.'" And you know, it just wouldn't make sense. But we'll do that in our business. And it's interesting that Shankly didn't do that. I mean, he probably didn't even think to do it, to be honest, Michael. But he just made the best of it.
And has the boot room still got a place in modern life? I mean, I'm a big fan of the boot room. Cup of tea, talk it through, argue, fall out, disagree, but find a way forward. Has the boot room still got a role in life, in any walk of life?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that's difficult to get with companies when I'm advising companies is that everybody says how busy they are, they can't be doing anything. And a lot of the companies I'm dealing with at the moment are saying to me, "This is a really good time for us to think through a different way of structuring everything and a different way of doing everything." And I'm saying to them, "Well, why didn't you do that before? So you're going to take this 3 months. So we've got to wait for a pandemic every 100 years for you to actually think about it, have we?" And they say, no, but we just haven't got the time. Well, I said, "You've just told me how important it is. Which is it? Either it's really important, in which case you should be doing it all the time." When I was in the military, for example, we had during the first Gulf War, I was the head of the intelligence section, section, which is sort of like, my wife was worried about it because I was in Saudi for some of the time, and she was worried about the Scud missiles and all that sort of nonsense. I said, "Babe, I'm 9 floors underground. They can't get anywhere near me. Don't worry about it." I said, "This is what," she said, "but what about the guys who work for you?" I said, "They're all with me. They stay with me because they know I get nowhere near any danger at all. I'm the guy they follow so they can stay out of trouble and they go nowhere near any bullets or anything like that. So I'm okay." When we ran that, what was really interesting was that the first day, when you move top secret signals around organizations in the military, they can't be photocopied. They have to be actually taken physically by hand, or they used to be. I mean, we're obviously going back a while. They didn't have to be written out, Michael, on scroll, but they had to be photocopied. And well, of course, the first day of the war, like thousands of signals are coming in, whereas normally half a dozen. So immediately the commander-in-chief goes, stop that, photocopy them, get them round. I'm like, brilliant. So that made everything quicker. Within a week of it all finishing, they were photocopying them all again. They weren't allowed to photocopy them rather again. So they went back to a system that they worked out during a war was rubbish, but they went back to it anyway. So I think that's one of the other lessons that we're going to try and take from this, or I'm saying to companies, if you start doing something now and it really works well, don't go back to square one. You don't, that's not how you work. That's not how this thing works.
And Chris, we're in week 5 of lockdown, so you must be used to it if you were 9 floors down, thankfully, safely. Would you let the military near this now in terms of helping us run the country and organise us and make some clear strategic decisions rather than standing up at a lectern and going absolutely true the whole time, which is what I think I hear most nights?
I think what I would do is not necessarily the military. I think it's like business. You'll often hear, well, business would run this a lot better than that. Well, actually, 80% of businesses go out of business pretty quickly. So we don't want to be like those businesses. It's the same with military. Military do certain things really well, but there's other things they're really rubbish at. So we don't want to get involved in that. But for example, I was talking to one Premier League club, and they were trying to work out how to get, they were trying to help out the local hospital and get drive-through for the tests. You know, they were doing drive-through for the test. And they said, yeah, we couldn't work out how to do the drive-through. And I said, well, why didn't you just phone up McDonald's? They do it really well. And they're like, oh, yeah, let's do that. Phone up the manager of McDonald's. He says, right, this is how you organise this. You do this, and it's bang, done. And so there are certain things that militaries do really well. And there are certain things that McDonald's do really well. And there are certain things, you know, if this is supposed to be a national effort, we'll get, you know, think about the job. When people look at jobs, they look at the job titles often. When I go and interview anybody, I often say to them, what's your job? And they say, oh, I'm the CEO. And I say, well, what's that? What do you do? What is your actual job? And they'll say things like, when you really nail them down, Michael, they'll say things like increase shareholder value or look after the brand or something. They keep it very narrow. That's their job. And so if you sort of work out what functions you want performed, we want driving functions performed. Well, who does that better than anybody? You know, Burger King or you know, a drive-in restaurant probably does it really well. Even if they don't, go and ask them, go and find out what they're doing. And I think this applies, and again, this is another thing that should apply after this all closes down. So go and ask other people, get diversity of ideas. And I think I'll do a plug for a friend of mine, Matthew Syed's new book, Rebel Ideas, is very much about that, getting diversity of intellects around. You know, somebody asked me who should we get in the room to do X, and I said, well, supposing you were doing IT type stuff, what do you think of me in terms of technology? And he said, you're useless. So I said, well, get me in the room, because I might come up with something slightly different about the user interface. All you're doing is pumping stuff out. I'm telling you, this doesn't work actually, because do you know what my mum asked? This is gospel truth. My mum said to me when she was in her 80s, so she's dead now. She probably will come back and ask me after this if she sees this. But she said to me, how do I turn this thing off? You know, when I worked it with her. And I said, that bottom left-hand corner. And she said, yeah, but it says start. And I'm like, good shout, Mum. It does say start. And why would you press that to stop it? And she's like, well, because we all sort of knew that, didn't we? So get people in the room to ask questions, and you go, actually, 99 times out of 100, that question will have a simple answer by the expert. But every 100th question, the expert will go, good idea. Let's look a bit deeper into that. So,
do you trust experts? Because do you trust experts?
I trust experts to advise me, and that's why I think if I'm the boss, if I'm making a decision, I listen to everybody I can listen to. And I think that's one of the problems that the government have had here. You know, they haven't been guided by the science; they've been led by the science. And for me,
what's the difference, Chris? Because
well, the difference is the science is
in my pub. This is my favourite topic. What's the difference between being guided by it and led by it?
Well, I'll give you an example. I think when you and I were talking the other day, you told me a story about Dave Brailsford. Perhaps you could just say that out loud, and I'll tell me what you tell the.
Well, I think it's one of the more controversial rules is that I think that if you just let your team, this could be a sports team just led by science, you might not, what I would do, have a Norman Hunter, because Norman Hunter, as we mentioned last week in the pub, he played over 700 games for Leeds, as did 6 of his teammates. If his career had just been led by the science, would he have played 700 games? I don't know.
Exactly. So what you've got the science to do is to say to you, to come to you and say, listen, boss, I think that Norman shouldn't play this week because he needs to rest. And you say, well, actually, we need to win this game. I don't care if he's injured for the rest of the season. This game's really important. He's playing. That's leadership, that you're making that decision. You've taken into account what the scientists have said. You've taken into account, because what we're saying, we've been led by the science. No, we're not. We've been led by the scientists. You've got those 5 there. There's another 5 somewhere else in the world who are probably saying the exact opposite. So that's your job. And I thought what was interesting today is that, and I said this to you before, Michael, that one of the key managerial tools that you've got in this situation is transparency. Just keep it as open as you can, not because of a moral reason, not because of ethics or anything like that, because it's sensible management. Keep it open. So what does Boris do today? As soon as he comes out, first thing he says is this morning, we're going to be as transparent and as open as we possibly can. If you check his speech, right, i.e. we haven't been up to now, and it was wrong. And you need to get out and get because if you say to somebody, look, we're following this science, and then 3 weeks later it sort of changes, from herd instinct to whatever we are now. If you say to me, listen, I followed the science, I really messed up there. That guy didn't know what he was talking about, so I've dumped him, and we're doing this, and we're changing that. We'd all go, fair enough, that happens. But if you keep saying, well, we're going to do this, and then it doesn't happen. We're going to do this, then it doesn't happen. We're going to do this, and it doesn't. You need to be transparent right at the start. I'm sure, people like Brian, like top professional players, as much as they sort of might not like some of the honesty, they prefer it to somebody trying to sugarcoat it and mess them about. They prefer to have a stand up and have a fight than to mealy mouth around it. Obviously, Brian, I wouldn't have a fight with you. I mean, let's put that to one side for the moment. But I might have done, actually. I was just thinking, how old are you, Brian?
I am 52.
52. I'll tell you what, when I was 25, I could have taken you.
Definitely.
You were only about 4 then. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael.
No. Listen. You've come in for a pint in my pub, and I've pulled you a pint. You can say what you like. You carry on.
He's starting a fight now.
Yeah.
I know. It's a Shankly Arms. You can have a bit of a ding dong if you need
but
it.
But if this was a wedding, I'd have started to fight already, Brian.
Chris, to ask you another question, which we discussed last week. And I've done it. You've got far more letters after your name than I'll ever have, because I think my academic days are past me. But I've got some books up here, and I've done some neuroscience work. And this uncertainty, what it's doing to us as people, because you've worked with some of the world's best leaders in military, in business, in sport. And what I found is that if they know it's going wrong, they don't mind getting the sack. It's knowing when they're going to get the sack. What does uncertainty do to us as a race? Because as we go into week 5, I think it is now, the lockdown, that's what's getting to us, in my view. What does uncertainty do to us as people?
Well, as human beings, we detest it. We absolutely detest it. As you said, we'd rather somebody say you're fired than somebody come in and say, well, we're having to think about restructuring, and we might, your job might be at risk. So do you know what you do when you do a formal redundancy according to our laws? You have to tell everybody who's likely to be redundant. Now, you frighten the life out of them. You're only going to make 10% redundant, but you frighten them up. So when I made a lot of people redundant, not recently, a few years ago, I had to make about 20% of the staff redundant. And I talked to the HR people, and they say, well, you have to pick out who's at risk. And I said, well, we're all at risk. So everybody's at risk. What we're going to do, this business needs to save this amount of money. So you might I say I might decide the best person to go is me because I'm getting paid the most. So so I'm at risk of redundancy. Don't tell 10 people they're at risk of redundancy if you know you're only going to get rid of 2 of them, and you more or less know who they're going to be before you start. So let's going back to, let's be transparent. Let's be honest. We've got 4 strikers here, and we need to lose 1. And you're all right, Brian, because you're a mate now. But everybody else is in danger of redundancy. But yeah, but why me, boss? Because Brian's twice your size. That's why it's going to be you dwarf. So that's going to be that you're out. So people are really frightened of uncertainty. They're more frightened of uncertainty than anything else. And the other thing that's really dangerous is during periods of high uncertainty, like we're in now, conspiracy theories, research has shown, just absolutely abound. Where we got this, I'm about to say something. Please God, there's nobody within hearing distance that says to me I was one of them. But did anybody genuinely believe that a G5 mask had anything to do with a virus? Was there anybody out there? Yes, there was, apparently. Who knew? Who knew? Just a little bit of thinking about this. Actually, that's probably unlikely. So if you allow, and that's because there's uncertainty around. So if somebody comes out day one and says, this is rubbish, this is not going to happen, here's the evidence, this is why this is, you've closed that down. Now, with the system that we've got at the moment, the problem that we've got is there is genuine uncertainty, but you can still get coping mechanisms for that. And one of the things I read somewhere, I can't remember who said it now, but if I can't find it in the next week or so, I'm going to claim it for myself.
Go on.
He called it the elastic calendar. And so what he meant by that was, that you're going to transition into this pandemic, you're going to manage this pandemic, and then you're going to exit from it. There's sort of 3 stages that you're going to go through. And within each of those stages, there might be, we can open this number of shops, we can do this, we can do that. That's what's going to happen in these stages. We don't exactly know when they are. So we're going to say it's 2 years away, say, for example. And we're going to say it's 2 years away. So that's the target. So that's the certainty. So you can start planning around that. Supposing I said to somebody, to a football manager, we're going to restart the season 15th of March, 2021. He's able to now sort of manage it and say, then we go, this is the elastic bit. We go, oh, hang on a minute. We found a vaccine. It's actually going to be 1st of December. Right. It just contracts the calendar. But the phases that he's going to have to go through are just the same. So he's told you this is the stages we're going to go through. And until you see these shops opening, we're not in phase 2. So when you start seeing that, so it doesn't mean it gives you absolute certainty, because nothing's certain, taxes and death, as they say. But it gives you some sort of coping mechanism to be able to get through it. And so that's what we're looking for all the time. So the more uncertainty you put into the system, the more frightened people get, the more they overreact or underreact or whatever. Or in Miami last week, there was thousands out on the beach who basically said, this is rubbish, we ain't doing this anymore. And then what do? And that may be because if they just said, well, actually we're thinking of closing it, easing it off next week, just hang on another week, you could have those sort of conversations. So I think it's not about getting rid of uncertainty, it's about managing it. Obviously, if you can get rid of it, then that's fine, but it's about managing it.
What about fear? I've got my little personal fear that people are very frightened now. They will be frightened for a long time because we know there's something horrible out there. And everyone listening to this tonight will know at least one person who's been badly affected by this wretched virus. But I've never seen people more frightened. And at some point, we're not going to live a life risk-free anymore. It's just, you can't live a life risk-free. It's impossible. How do we react to fear when we're really frightened about something? Do we cower? Do we hide? Do we just buy more masks? What do we do?
I think this is a very personal question. I mean, whether you like it or not, there are 2 things that most people hold in their minds for a long time during their lives. One is, I'm pretty sure, and I can't understand why everybody gets so upset about this, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to live forever. I'm pretty sure I know nobody else has done over the time, but I'm pretty sure I am going to actually live forever. Simultaneously, I'm pretty sure I could get run over tomorrow. Both of those things I hold in my mind. If I can put Professor's head on, in George Orwell's 1984, double think. So the ability to be able to hold two conflicting ideas in your mind at the same time. I know I'm going to live forever, or I could die tomorrow. And being able to do that, I'm going to be able to do these things in the future, but I know it could all end at this moment. So each individual has to have that coping mechanism of how they're going to actually deal with that fear. It's the same as I'm really frightened of heights. I know rationally it's just ridiculous, and if I'm forced into it, in a dim and distant past, I used to be a land surveyor and used to have to go up to the top of very high buildings so that you could get a view of the area and you could use your distance measuring stuff. And sometimes you'd be on top of a water tower with force 8 gale blowing, and you have to climb up there, and somebody's scared of height. I mean, once I got stuck halfway up and couldn't move. I was so frightened I couldn't move up or down. And at that moment, I'm the sort of person who goes, right, hang on, calm down. You might as well go up there now, get the job done, and have a think about getting down later, because you're pretty sure that when you come down, your boss is going to send you back up anyway. So you might as well get it done. And I was able to get up and get back down again. Now, if you give me the opportunity, do you want to do that again? No, thank you. I don't want to do that again. And so you have to understand that fear in different people and try to manage that. That's where the individual relationship comes up, treating each player the same, or each worker the same, or each family member as they need to be treated. I think it's a very personal thing, the way you deal with fear.
And we've got a few more minutes left, Chris. Listen, I'm going to say you are the expert on leadership. Now that I've spent more money than you, you're a richer man on leadership now. How has it changed in the last 5 to 10 years? Because with the Shankly approach, with the old-fashioned approach, people use the phrase old school. I hate people saying that, because some of the stuff was so right. I call it right school. How has leadership changed in the recent past? Because there's people listening to this to know who are studying leadership. How has it changed in recent years, Chris?
I think the person I would quote here, I was in some event with Eddie Jones, the rugby guy, and he was saying how interested he was in the approach of, and he used Klopp and Guardiola as examples, and he said what he found difficult and what they found really easy was to be able to flip their personality almost in an instant. And the way he described it, he said, if you watch them during the game, and as players, I know there's players on here as well, players will understand this. If you watch them during the game, nobody's allowed to put their foot in a different place than they've been training for that week. They'll jump all over them during the game. They'll hammer them. They'll sub them if they're not doing as they're told. Everything is to a very tight pattern. He says the moment the final whistle goes, he said they turn into their favourite uncle. They go over to them, they put their arms around them, they hug them, they give them a kiss and all that sort of stuff. And they're able to switch. And he thinks that's the future. He basically says that the brand of each individual player at the top level is so important now to those players that you have to treat them in a slightly different way. Because I'm old school, and maybe I can be Bill Shankly's stand-in now, I'm not so sure that's true. I do a lot of work with students, not the students that Tony uses, students 18, 19, 20, who I'm told are these millennials, they won't do this, they won't do that, they won't do that. What I've found is actually they like being challenged. They like doing, not doing as they're told, but they like being challenged, tasked, pushed. They like that. So some of the faculty members that I've worked with, they said, how come all the students turn up in your class, but that miss my class? And I say, well, because if they're not there, I'll go up in a cafe and find them. And I go, oi, get your ass, you're supposed to be in class. And they just go, okay. But nobody's pushing them. So some of it's our fault as well. We can't all be turn ourselves into millennials. I'm a baby boomer. And, so I have to be an old, serious person to look after people like Brian and Tony and Tim.
Here's one for you. How do
all these
you still
youngsters.
relate to students? Because Chris, I know you told me how old you look unbelievable for your age. You either wear a lot of makeup or you just look well, and you're a good advert for heart attacks as well. But how do you keep up with people who are now 50 years younger than you when you're teaching and learning?
I don't know. It's probably a question you should ask Tony more or Andy more than me. I suppose it goes back. I just really enjoy it. I mean, the brighter and smarter. I suppose this is a weakness. If you say to me, look, I'll give you a job at Manchester United coaching the under-14s, or you can coach Exeter City's first team. I'll take the first team. I want to coach the best, or I want to teach the best. I want to be, because it's more fun. I learn more from the best, and you get students, and the students that I've worked with Tony and Andy's organisation have been just brilliant. You know, none of them care whether they're going to challenge me or not. They really don't care, and so and I just find that very, very, very encouraging. I find it enjoyable. I know I'm about to go all waffly now. I find it genuinely uplifting. I find it really uplifting. I go in and I come out. My missus always says when I get back, she says, you know, you're always bubbling when you come back from these things. The difference is when you get to my age, I do fall into a big snotty heap after that. But nobody sees it. In fact, going back to the heart attack, that's Tony. Tony made me, and Andy made me work on the morning I had a heart attack. They made me work. You know, what sort of nasty people are they? But I did it anyway. I did it. I got through it. I managed it, and I am suing their firm for. Well, I was going to sue their firm, but as I said to Andy, they've got no money. So what's the point?
Are you a bit of a bastard?
I can be.
What grates you? What gets you?
I'll tell you what, you shouldn't have asked this, right?
Well, after first sight, you're in my pub. You're in my pub.
Tim, load this up for the next hour. Right, I'll tell you what gets me. Couples walking along the pavement when I'm out for my walk, who think they're a unit as opposed to two separate people, and won't get into single file, so I have to walk in the bleeding road. Worse than that, a family of 4 today on bikes with 2 little kids on bikes come riding towards me. I'm on the pavement, they're on the pavement, and I just sort of stood there and went, what do you want me to do? And they go, well, we have to be on the pavement because our children can't go on the road. I said, 2 options here, mate. Leave them at home because that's where they should be. Second option, make them walk. Don't put them on a bike. I said, the reason bikes were invented was so that you could save energy. So get rid of the bike and walk, and then you can go in single file, and I don't have to walk in the middle of the road. Is there any chance of you doing that? And apparently they took offence.
I can't believe that for a minute.
Exactly. As I said to Tony before, I was drifting sort of gracefully, really, into grumpy old age. This pandemic has accelerated that process enormously. I am now fully into it. Don't start me on this crap. Do not start me, because. Okay,
one question before you can have a drink with Brian Dean. What will sport look like the other side of this pandemic? Because I've given up thinking, worrying about it now. Because what's going to happen?
It all depends on your time scale. What's it going to look like? What's it going to look like 5 years from now? It's going to look pretty much like it does now. You know, I mean, if you the place.
I'm not just talking Premier League football. I'm not just talking the god of Premier League. You know, I'm not just talking Liverpool and United and Arsenal, or even the greatest club size in the world. They may survive. What will the rest of sport, from rugby league to rugby union to cricket to golf to snooker, what will it look like the other side of this?
They'll all settle back into their rightful position, if you see what I mean. So if you've got if you look at somewhere like Exeter City or Southend or these clubs like or Bury, people that have drifted around the edge, they're going to still survive in some form or another. Bury, like Newport, took 10 years to get back to the league. Bury will get back to the league because Bury, the place, is not going to go away, is it? It's not going to disappear off the map, and so they're still going to need it. So if you look at Forbes biggest 100 firms, 100 years ago, there's only about one or two still exist. If you look at 100 football clubs from 100 years ago, 90 of them still exist. So they're not things that go away that much. What they're going to have to do is settle for certain things, but what they should have done in the first place. So if you look at Bury, for example, I was on a couple of phone-ins and people would say to me, well, we haven't got this, we haven't got that. And I said, yeah, a lot of the other clubs are working under the same problems, they've got the same revenue, the same things. You took a gamble. That's good for you. You took a gamble, you might pass. Well done, but you failed. So that's why you're going out of business. It's not my fault. I can't help it. And you look at, I'll give you two examples. Bournemouth and Wigan. When Bournemouth got promoted to the Premier League, they paid, now listen to this number, they paid 235% of their revenue in wages. Now, if you said that to any other business, do you think they're going to survive? No. But they gambled on the fact that when they could get in there with the amount of broadcasting money and everything, they could survive for a while. They also had, Russian money coming in. So they had revenue coming in. Wigan, pretty much the same, 210, 215% of revenue. They get up, they stay for a couple of years, they go back down and they find a level. And so there's a level that I think that things are going to settle back into. And there'll be the big clubs and there'll be the small clubs, but they're not going out of business. They're not going anywhere because where's the pipeline going to be if it's not going to be coming up through the leagues? The Premier League needs these other leagues to exist. That's where the pipeline is. And we've shown now, one of the things we've shown is that as a nation, we desperately need sport. Of any sort.
I saw the back page of the Times today was football asked to lift the mood, and 2 weeks ago they were being criticised for not being generous people, which is nonsense. And speaking of which, I'm going to hand you over now to a generous person, Brian Dean. I think he's up in Harrogate.
Before you go to Brian, Michael, can I
Sorry?
ask a couple of questions for you? I said just before you pass us over to Brian, I've got a couple of questions for you. Chris, so this one's coming from Simon in Scotland. He wants to know, tell us about the leadership style of Ancelotti and how he might have handled this situation.
It's difficult to say to people he's exactly what he looks like on TV, So I know him really well now, and I can tell you when we were writing the book, I would say to him, Carlo, is there anything you can tell me that's really sort of like off the wall a bit, I don't know, you had sex with a donkey or something, like anything you want to tell me so I can sell this book? No, Carlo's like looking at me and going, no donkey, no, definitely not. I'm like, okay, fine. But and he's just very laid back. He's very comfortable in his own skin. This is what we do. He says something that stuck with me forever. One thing he said stuck with me forever. I said, tell me when you've made a really bad decision so we can write about that as well. And he says, I've never made a bad decision. I'm like, yeah, come on. Must have made a bad decision. You must think of a bad decision. He said years ago, he said he should have bought Baggio from somewhere. And I said, what about that? You should have bought Baggio, but you didn't, you let him go and you've said you should have bought him. He said, yeah, I should have bought him. I said, well, surely that was a bad decision. No. That wasn't a bad decision. Well, how is it not a bad decision? He said, because at the time, with the way I thought and the information I had, it was the right decision. It just turned out wrong. Well, I'm like, I'd have been whipping myself, for years when you do that. You made those. But he's able to. He's so laid back. I mean, laid back's the wrong word. It sort of laid back makes it sound as if it's a bit lazy, but he's not. He's really intense about the game and everything, but nothing sort of seems to put him off. The only thing I ever heard him, and for your Scottish guy, the only thing I ever really got under his skin and a bit upset about was when he was at PSG, his mate Leonardo, who they'd worked with at Milan together, had got him in there. Leonardo was a sporting director, I think, and had got Carlo in as the head coach. And for some reason they fell out, and it really upset him. I could tell, genuinely upset him. And that's the only time I've ever seen him where you can say, yeah, he's really upset or he's really angry. The players tell me that every now and again he gets angry, and you know, because he goes into Italian and nobody's got a clue what he's saying, and so, but they know he's angry. So it's one of those, like, everybody stand back a bit. Stand back. Carlo's off on one here.
Hey, mate,
so I've never seen that.
No, I tell you what, I was married to an Italian, and the only time she started getting cheesed up, if she started speaking Italian, I knew I was in trouble.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Tony's got the next question coming from the USA, haven't you, mate?
Chris, question from Connor here.
Not Conor McGregor, is it?
Well, it just says Connor professional sport. He doesn't actually say where he's from, but I'm just checking. You're just warming up now, aren't you?
I'm warming up. I'm not fighting Connor. So
the question is, I've got a big interest in the comparison between UK sports and US sports. Given that you've worked in both industries, how do they differ as businesses?
That's an easy question, Connor, because if you take the NFL and take English football, for example, they're the two big giants. The NFL is the business. The clubs are divisions of the business. So they all make sure that they all make money. That's the option. Over here, the clubs are the businesses, and somebody has to try and manage that. And you know, so the job of being the president, your job of being the CEO of the Premier League, for example, is more negotiating. Where the commissioner of the NFL, for example, he's given authority basically to make money, go out and make us money. And they've got some pillars in the NFL, which are you must have competitive balance, which is why they have the draft and everything like that, why that all goes on. Any decision taken by the league must be TV, broadcasting friendly. And then they go on down, there's 4 or 5 other things. But basically it's all around, how does this business make money, right? Whereas we've sort of edged into that. And what I think's been clever about the Premier League is that they've edged as far as they can towards that sort of collective to increase their money-making opportunities. So, but the big difference is that's the big difference for me. I don't know if Connor wants to come back, give him my number and I'll talk to him.
Just following on from that, he goes on to say, very varied background, Chris, from the Navy to academia. Is it true you were also a baker? A baker? I wasn't aware of that.
I was a butcher and a candlestick maker, but I never.
Well, whether you've got that one wrong, whether you know something we don't, Connor, please get back in touch.
Actually, I tell you, my youngest son used to work 4 o'clock in the morning when he was about 12 in the baker's next door to where we lived in Hackney. I don't know if he knows something I don't, Connor. He used to come home, you used to have to wash him down before he went to school because he was covered in flour.
Yeah, then maybe there's the link.
Well, I'll tell you what, Chris, can you any chance of a quick final drink, please, with Brian Dean? Because Brian's got his little snug up there in Harrogate. He's got a little guest for you as well. And so, Brian, are you still with us, Brian? I think he is.
Still here. I'm still
Brian.
here. Hiya.
How are you? Where and who have you got this week in this snug with to have a chat with Chris Brady?
So I'm in Harrogate. Yeah, I think we got the last of the good weather today. It's looking a little bit cloudy now. In the snug this week, I've got Alan Williams, who is now a colleague of mine. Alan is the former commercial director at Millwall and Crawley. Alan's, sometimes I think from my point of view, I'm very interested in how clubs are going to, come out of this thing. So maybe we can ask Alan a few questions as to how what his thoughts are. How you doing, Al?
Not too bad, Bri. Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to come to the pub knowing that I haven't got to buy you a drink for once.
I'm glad I don't have to get drinks down south. It's a lot cheaper up north,
Not in Harrogate, it isn't.
Yorkshireman, yeah. Well,
not in
Harrogate. No. I'm just outside of Harrogate. I'm sensible, me.
We can go to Betty's for a cake.
Alan,
If you
can I
can-
ask Alan a question, please? Because
I've got a Betty's cake here. I've got a Betty's fruit cake. I've
Oh,
got
is it
one.
stodgy? Is it stodgy in the middle?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It shouldn't be allowed. It should be banned. I mean, it's.
How long did you have to queue for that?
that's why I got a heart attack. Alan, can I ask you a question?
It's the crack coke. It's the crack cocaine of food.
Alan, I've got a question for you on behalf of Brian in his snug with Chris listening. Is that a Millwall shirt behind you, Alan, from your Millwall days?
It is, yes. Yeah, we played our remembrance game and designed a one-off kit where we gave all the proceeds to Headley Court, which is the Army Rehabilitation Centre. You'll think that Millwall, you know, for many people's opinions of it, is probably one of the best supporters of military charities, and I know that historically they always got the largest collection on remembrance games around the country. So
it's the poppy behind you as well. But
yeah, that's right. Our kit manufacturers in Italy, Macron at the time, designed the kit for me. I was the only person at Millwall that knew we were doing it till about 2 months before the game, because you can't keep things secret nowadays, especially in football. And we just played in it once. We sold all the replicas off. All the players' shirts were signed off. I think we raised about £15,000 for Headley Court, and we did a great video that went along with the kit release, which, you know, went mad on YouTube. So, you know, it's good to support charity, and, you know, our militaries. You know,
and how are Millwall going to get through this, because they're a championship club? They haven't got the huge income. They've had no gate receipts. They won't have any gate receipts till whenever. And with Chris listening, because he said that these football league clubs don't go away. They always come back. How will someone like Millwall get through this? Because they are, you know, 12 or 13,000 every week, but they've got no income coming in. How can they survive this?
Well, I think Chris is right in what he says, that the thing is, they will survive it. How they survive it, they'll find a way. They're very, very fortunate, Millwall, to have a very, very long-standing, generous, loyal chairman. You know, out in the States, you know, John Berylson's supported that club for many, many years, and is a fantastic chairman. So I think that John will support the club in the short term, and I believe the long term as well. But the club will do all it can to generate as much revenue. You know, I know that retail-wise, they're still doing very, very well. They've got a great retail arm there. They're doing their season, you know, they're doing their pre-season ticket sales. And, you know, I think it's going to, the whole dynamic's going to change. Everything's going to change. But everyone will find their level, as Chris says. And I think that people will do business differently. And they'll just find ways to survive. Football will always survive because of supporters, and supporters are lifelong. They don't really come and go. You know, Millwall's got a core, hardcore 10,000 that will be there for every game. You know, the big games, they'll get more. And, you know, those people won't disappear. They're a loyal fan base like every other club in the country.
How do you know Brian so well?
Well, Brian, in effect, is my boss, and I'm very fortunate to have him as such. But, you know, Brian's chairman of Phoenix Sport and Media. I've been there now a year as commercial director, and I was introduced to Brian by Craig Short, who I've known for many, many years. So in my pre-football days, when I was working for Audi, I sold Craig and half the Blackburn team an awful lot of cars. And that's how I got to know Craig and a lot of the contacts I've got in football now through the VIP scheme at Audi. So yeah, I'm very, very fortunate to be now working with a business that's full of so many what I would call legends, to embarrass him, but you know, it's a blessed place to be. Can't speak now, Brian, can you?
Can't speak. I'm not. I'm humble.
You've taken them by surprise there.
My teeth nearly came out then. You know what I mean? I'm so humbled. But
well, at least we're not asking him about the donkey.
No, we're not going there.
Listen, I'm interested because I've heard a lot of different views on this, but what do you think? Regionalisation is a way of clubs surviving? When we talk about, you know, teams like Bury and you know, even Millwall, you know, if we went regional, would that help teams to kind of, you know, cement their position? I don't know. How, do you guys want to? What do you think, guys?
I think one of the issues there is, I think it's probably a sensible idea, Brian, but it's like a lot of sensible ideas in football. There's a lot of passion and other stuff to take into account. But if I had to predict the future, I'd say that within the next 10 to 15 years, the Premier League will basically absorb the Championship as the second division of the Premiership, and then the first and second divisions, to a certain extent, will be cut loose. I think one of the things that people forget is that when the last TV deals were done, sorry, not the last ones, the one before the last, the Premier League went up something like 74% in terms of what they were earning. But at more or less the same time, the EFL broadcasting deal went down by about 20%. And it's sort of one of those things that got missed when people were talking about it. And I thought, hang on, this is dangerous, because if they absorb the Championship, which would make business sense, then you've got to think about the first and second divisions are going to end up a bit like Scottish football to a certain extent, which is limited in the amount of revenue it can generate on its own. So it then relies just on gate receipts. And so you might then get, as you're saying, Brian, you might get regionalisation because you can cut down costs. But you've got to go back. You only got to go back. Well, go back to when I was playing, and there was, the idea of having a national league, having a fifth division, that's full time, and national, was just would have been laughed at. Would have been laughed out of court. They would have said, "No, that's ridiculous. We're trying to save costs, not increase costs." So the fact that we've got 5 divisions, we've got 100 professional, more than 100 fully professional teams. It's not like any other country in Europe. They've all got far fewer leagues. They go to non-league within sort of like 40 clubs, and so it's difficult to see how the model can continue to work. But having said that, I wouldn't bet that you will go regional, no matter how sensible it is. Because we're not. Football's not like that. It's an interesting industry like that.
Chris, can I just jump in and ask one question here? Because the person who's asked it has said he's got to jump off. Quite interesting question. He says, which sports leader or manager from the past would you like to see leading the country through this current predicament, and why?
Oh, Christ. Valery Lobanovsky.
You might have to explain to some who he is.
However, why? Why don't they go away and learn?
Now he's on one. I like that.
No, Valery Lobanovsky who was the coach of Dynamo Kiev during. If you look at top 10 managers of all time globally, he'll be on that list somewhere. And he was the coach of Dynamo Kiev. But what was really interesting about him was he met another guy, a scientist, and going back to being guided by science, Michael, he met a scientist called Zelentnov, who was at the time running the cybernetics unit in Kiev. And they got together, and it was absolutely, and the teaming of them was great, because Zelentnov was come up with all the ideas, and what Zelentnov said in his autobiography was that what was great about Lobanovsky was he was the guy who could implement my ideas. I wasn't very good at that. They were a great team. So if I wanted somebody to take us through, I'd want 2 guys like that to take us through. I wouldn't want one guy. I want 2 guys like that who met day after day after day. If you get a chance to read about Lobanovsky and Zelentnov together rather than just one, because one will just show you about the football, but the other stuff, like for example, I can remember one example. They said, how do we create high press? They didn't call it a high press then. I said, so we're talking about late 60s, early 70s. So we were doing a high press then. So all these geniuses who are coming out with it now, let's do Gegen pressing. They were doing it 50 years ago. So what they said was, Zelentnov said, Lobanovsky said, how can we press the other team to get it back as far up the field as we can? And Zelentnov come up and said, right, I want to show you this. what he showed him was how swarm of bees work. So he said, watch this. Once the leader engages and triggers it, so we hear the word trigger now, don't we?
Yeah.
Which player goes in and triggers the high press? Watch the first bee, triggers it, whoosh, and they all go in. He said, that's how we need to play. So now Lobanovsky now goes back to the team and goes, right, this is how we're going to play. We're going to do. Now, of course, the difference between then and now is the players are 10 times fitter. So what Lobanovsky had to do, and this is what I like about it, is you don't just have one idea, you have an adjustment. So what Lobanovsky said, he created a thing called the false press or the fake press, where you make out you're going to go, the other team suddenly starts to react to it, and then you drop off and have what we would call a low block now. But you know, and I said to a group of head coaches on a call recently, I said to them, what do you think about the idea of a fake press or a false press? Not one of them knew what I was talking about. Now, that's probably because I'm an old person and he was where he was. But you know, that's because we don't educate ourselves about the game. You know, when I was coaching youth football, I used to say to them, you know, who in your position, who do you look up to? And they'd always say somebody in the last couple of years. Nobody would say, well, actually, I'm playing sweeper. Well, have you ever watched Baresi play? You know, 5'9". You know, well, no, we need 6 foot. Well, actually, apparently in Milan's history, the best player voted the best player in their history. How many other clubs can say a defender was voted the best player in their history? Baresi was 5'9". You know, I mean, 150, 160 pounds, something like that. You know, and
Chris,
yeah.
we're running out of time now because I've got my Jimmy Greaves because I was associated with Brentford recently, or before this broke down, and I asked them all, and a few of them did. I asked all the staff, the players, to watch the Jimmy Greaves recent documentary because his numbers, his data. I mean, call it data, just the goal scoring record. But then they came back when I went in the next week and said, "I said, did you watch that documentary?" And they were blown away by but not just by the clips, but him as a person, the story, but also his track record as a footballer. So who's the best player you've seen? And just speak as a fan in the pub now, because I've got to chuck you out in a minute.
Yeah. Okay.
You asked about the best leader. Who's the best player you've ever seen in your life?
I've seen about 3 or 4 16-year-olds. You looked at them straight away and went, this is something special here. One was Alan Shearer. When I was in the military, I used to run the national military side. And Shearer played against our guys who were all 26, 27 year olds. I used to train up at Harrogate, by the way, Brian. 26, 27.
Was he at Southampton at the time, was he?
Yeah, he was a 15-year-old at Southampton, and they put him on against our guys who were all 27, soldiers, Marines, really hard, and he bullied everybody as a 15-year-old and scored 3 or 4 goals or whatever. You know, and you thought, well, hang on a minute. You know, there was him, Trevor Francis as a 16-year-old I saw, and Maradona as a 16-year-old. I saw all of them play as 16-year-olds, and you think, oh my God, what am I watching here? But if I have to get into this, I will always fight Ronaldo's corner over Messi. So if you want to start a row in a club, I'm going for Ronaldo over Messi, and you're all wrong. And now I'm leaving the pub quickly.
Chris, just a quick one on that. What about, because one player that played in my era that I would pay to watch him, and I wouldn't pay to watch a lot of people, but Brazilian Ronaldo, for me, just the most complete player ever. You know,
I think it's difficult. Yeah, I mean, during that era, during the bit where he was at Barcelona, Brian, that was, but it's like George Best. You know, it's sort of like a couple of years. It's sort of like a flower, you know, blooming and then just suddenly dying. And I think the problem with Ronaldo was he never, because of the injuries as well. Yeah. I mean, Maradona came back from the injury. Do you remember the Goicoechea injury?
Yeah.
Do you remember Goicoechea was the guy that put Ronaldo out?
The butcher of Bilbao.
The butcher from Bilbao. But the interesting thing, Brian, do you know how long he got suspended for?
Go on.
2 weeks?
No, they suspended him until Maradona could play again.
Not a bad shout, that.
That's not a bad shout, is it?
Yeah. I saw Ronaldo as a 17. Well, no, sorry, it was at PSV because we played against PSV in the in the UEFA Cup, and we watched him warm up, and he looked as though he had a limp. And we had a guy in our team at the time who fancied himself as one of the quickest around. At that time, John Pemberton, and he was quick. Pemberton.
He was quick, John.
Yeah, but he kind of did a man-to-man on Ronaldo, and he couldn't get, and it couldn't. It was just physically. I don't think people realise what a specimen he was, Ronaldo. But he was so quick. I've never ever seen anything like that. It was basically his nickname's the Phenom, innit? He was unbelievable.
I never saw him really young. I saw him as he got over that Barcelona period. I think he was right. But there's what I think is more interesting is there's only about, and I've been alive more than anybody else on this. So, but I can probably only think about less than 10 players who are so special that they can lift the whole team on their own. I mean, there's loads of great players, but some, a Maradona at Napoli, they've never won anything before, never won anything since, and yet him and Careca at Napoli, they win the Scudetto two out of 3 years. So there's those sort of things. And Ronaldo, wherever he goes, the current Ronaldo is right. Okay, I'm going to go to this club now. I'll make them champions. I'll make Portugal European champions. There are certain players who are very special. I tell you what, I do think Kevin De Bruyne might be something special.
Well, on that go, let's bring Tony Faulkner in just to say good night to us all, because he's got a little. Is that a Peter Reid shirt behind you, Tony? Please tell me it's a Peter Reid shirt.
No, that is a Rubinho shirt.
Is that right?
That's Rubinho's first game for City against Chelsea, 2009, when he scored the free kick.
Yeah,
that's the shirt he wore.
The own goal.
Signed to my son underneath. So 2000.
Oh, that's good. Well, Tony, on behalf of VSI, because you invite me to be your guest landlord, Chris, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Brian and Alan too, wherever you are, Alan, south somewhere. Chris, it's been lovely to meet you. I pressed play and you didn't let me down because you just and I love it. I love it. A little bit of a rant doesn't go amiss now and again. So thank you very much. But I'm handing back to Tony to close up the pub for the night.
Night, Michael.
Cheers, Chris.
Chris, thanks for everything tonight. As I said earlier, I feel that you're just warming up and just getting into your stride. But we are capped at an hour, so thanks for your time tonight. Brian, Alan, thanks for getting involved. Doug, appreciate your time, guys. Next week we're going slightly off piste a little bit. The guest drinker that we've got is a celebrity known as Michael Griffiths, who is best well known for starring on Love Island. So Michael is a big Liverpool fan and does a lot of work with regards to mental health, and he's an ambassador in that space. So this one is going to challenge our resident landlord, Michael Caulfield, a little bit, as he's now going to have to get stuck into Love Island over the course of the next week, find out how it works, who Michael is, and get some info for a conversation with Michael Griffiths. So that's next week. As usual, we'll be sending out the invites and we'll post it on social media. So we look forward to seeing you all next week, guys. See you then.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.
Cheers.